I slept in the practice for the first 3 months.
It'll take twice as long, be twice as difficult, be twice as painful, and yet in the end it will still be worth it.
Continue to stack those days, because ultimately there's no overnight success.
Welcome back to another episode of the BYU Tech Transfer Podcast. Today we have a special guest. You might notice we look fairly similar and have the same last name. This is my brother, Jorden Mortensen. He founded Hometown Dental Practices, right?
Partners.
Hometown Dental Partners in Texas. And so I'll let him give a little bit of an intro to himself, his background, and what he's doing these days.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yes, I founded Hometown Dental Partners, and we are a dental organization that focuses on serving small town Texas. You know, you and I, Bennett, we're small town kids. We grew up on a large cattle ranch, and when I bought my first rural practice, it's when I decided, I love these people. I love providing care to these smaller towns, and ultimately we built an organization around providing dentistry to these small towns and just elevating the standard of care that I felt like in many ways, these small towns, the care has been compromised. And so as I've come in and purchased several practices in small towns, it's been an incredible experience to grow an organization that's focused on small town dentistry and just elevating that care there.
Yeah, fantastic. And let's talk a little bit about how you got started, because your first practice that you bought, period, was not in a small town. And so tell us a little bit about that experience and why coming out of dental school, you decided to buy your own practice versus going to work for somebody else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I would say I'm probably not like a lot of them. You know, we were talking earlier about, so many entrepreneurs, they have this unique story where as a kid, they were constantly drumming up the next idea to go sell to their friends or to their neighbors.
Right, launched 5 businesses in high school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that wasn't me. You and I, our dad really pushed just being a good, ethical worker, being, respectful of your boss's time and just, having this strong, ethical, moral, work ethic. Yeah. And that's where I took that. Ultimately as a kid, I just wanted to go serve a mission for the church and be a good kid. And coming back from my mission, I really had to make the decision of where I wanted to be professionally, and ultimately landed on dentistry. But it wasn't until I got to dental school that I ultimately decided, okay, hey, there's an incredible opportunity to provide well for my family and really build an organization that stands true to who I am as a person and helps me develop to becoming that next best version of myself. Right. And so when I was in dental school, I started to wrap my head around, how am I going to pay my student loans back? That was just like the big worry that a lot of dental students have. Yeah. And so
it's a lot of student loans.
It's a lot of student loans. Yeah. And I went to a private dental school. It wasn't any state-sponsored, subsidized dental school. It was a private dental school. And so as I was looking to pay my loans out, back out of school, I started looking at, all right, how much am I going to have to make on a yearly basis to pay back my loans in 3 years?
Start doing the math of it all.
Yeah. I mean, during class, I was running my Excel spreadsheet and trying to figure all that out. And ultimately, I landed on, I'm going to have to get into practice ownership. I'm going to have to build a real asset that has value. Right. And that's when I decided I got my MBA at night during dental school. Okay. And then throughout my dental school kind of career, the 4 years there, I just lived, breathed, slept the dental business, the small service business that dentistry is. And coming out of school, I called, 15 different brokers in the state of Texas. Ultimately, decided, hey, Texas is where I'd like to be and where I'd like to own my first practice.
Yeah. And was there any reason for Texas specifically, or just felt like it was the right thing to do at the time?
Yeah, we ran a demographic study with a guy here out of Lehigh, actually. He runs demographics for dentists. Right. And ultimately, there were a lot of arrows pointing to Austin, Texas, and Texas in general. Okay. There's lots of people moving in. And so you had this population density that was favorable for dentists. And then there was the growth. And ultimately, you said, hey, Texas is where I'd like to be.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And my in-laws live in Houston, so that made it easy to have some type of family support there. Yeah. And so landed on Texas and ultimately decided Austin, Texas is where I wanted to be. And, I spoke with 15 different brokers, looked at 25 different offices, looking at, trying to buy them. Yeah. And ultimately I would be taking out a loan, a small business loan with a bank to purchase that practice. Right. And banks don't lend to new grads. They don't trust that you can reproduce the
Right.
dentistry.
They want some sort of track record before they
Exactly.
loan.
Exactly. And so I called 12 different banks and had 11 no's, and I got one yes that was a kind of yes.
Yeah.
They, essentially gave me a couple stipulations. They said, all right, we got to have a couple letters of recommendation from your professors that you can reproduce and do the dentistry that these practices are producing.
Right.
You then have to convince the seller dentist to carry part of the note.
Okay.
They weren't going to take all the risk on
Right.
funding this practice.
So it was a yes, but it came with strings attached.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the last string was that I had to have a part-time job.
Okay. Okay.
They just wanted to make sure I could, make the loan payments.
Yeah.
And so I said, great. Now that I have these rules and I got a yes, that's all I needed.
Right.
And so I took every $100 plane ticket between Salt Lake. I went to a private dental school here in South Jordan, Utah.
Yeah.
And I took every $100 plane ticket from Salt Lake to Austin I could, almost every other weekend. Bless my wife's heart. She just dealt with me trying to do that, and ultimately found a practice downtown Austin off of South Congress Avenue.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah,
doctor,
it was like downtown Austin.
Downtown
I
Austin.
remember visiting, and I was like, "Oh, we're like in the heart of the city here."
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah. And so, convinced the doctor to, carry part of the note.
Yeah.
The bank, funded the deal and picked up my part-time job, and we were off to the races.
Yeah.
And it was exactly what I needed, because I was ready to jump into ownership. I was excited, and I was one that I had analyzed it to death, and I needed to just get going.
Yeah.
And it may have been a messy start. And I wouldn't say it was a messy start, but it was just one that I just needed to get in the game.
Right.
I needed to have an asset in my name that was ready to grow.
Yeah.
And
Well,
ultimately,
you were prioritizing the action over inaction, right? This is something I can do right now, even if it's maybe not perfect. It's something that's available to me.
Exactly. And plus the bank had, they had vetted the deal as well.
Oh, yeah,
so I was
right.
having confidence that they did their due diligence as well as mine. And
Yeah.
and so, yeah, we got the deal done. And so I bought my first practice 2 months out of school, and we were off to the races.
Yeah.
I slept in the practice for the first 3 months while my family, my wife and 2 kids at the time, they slept at my in-laws. And I would go see them on the weekends, and I'd come back, and I would, I picked up a gym membership for $10 a month, and I'd wake up in the morning and I'd go shower at the gym, and then I'd come back and show up to work like nothing, like I hadn't just spent the entire night there.
Yeah.
And just grew that practice.
No.
And that was where my start was.
Yeah. No, and that's amazing. And I want to talk a little bit more about like the mindset that you have to have or something like that, because there's a great Elon Musk quote, right, who talks about entrepreneurship and building things. And he says it's like staring into the abyss and chewing glass, right? He says eventually you stop staring into the abyss because it's not helpful, but you're always chewing glass.
Yeah.
I mean, there's tremendous hardships and challenges that come from starting and doing your own thing versus, you had a dentistry degree, right? You could have gone and worked for somebody else and made a pretty good salary.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you mentioned it earlier that we kind of came to entrepreneurship a little bit later in life, right? Like our focus early on was being good employees and good individuals, and like gave us a really solid base.
Yeah.
But I would say both of us really found entrepreneurship and a love for it probably in college, maybe even a little bit later, right?
Oh, absolutely. I probably would say that I had a business minor here at BYU and loved those classes, but it wasn't until I had some pressure behind me of student loans that really kicked me into gear and said, wow, entrepreneurship and business ownership really not only, if it's successful, can help you provide well for your life, but it helps you become just an excellent person. It's very much a spiritual game as you look to, improving your leadership to then scale, your business and grow your business.
Right.
Because your business is only going to do as well as, really like you're the ceiling.
Yeah.
You
I mean, you
your
become the
leadership's
limiting
ceiling.
factor in most cases.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, especially when you're also doing dentistry, right, early on, which is what you were doing.
Well, yeah, and that's the conundrum that every dentist, and I would
yeah.
say every service business owner deals with, is that they wear all the hats.
Right.
The E-Myth book is a beautiful book that describes all these hats that business owners wear. And as a dentist, I mean, you're the CEO. You're providing the vision for the team. You're also the CMO. You're dealing with all the marketing. You're trying to figure out what's going to work and what isn't working, and running the KPIs to help manage your marketing efforts. And then on top of that, you get your monthly financial reports from your accountants.
Right.
And so you're the acting CFO as well. And amongst all of that, you're dealing with HR issues, because people are the number one blessing of being a business owner, and also sometimes the number one headache. And
Absolutely.
and then with all of that, you get mixed into, oh yeah, you have to still see patients.
Yeah,
and
you still have to do the
care.
dentistry.
Yeah. And that's where dentists, and I would say a lot of small business owners, they need to start to distinguish between being self-employed versus being a business owner. Because becoming a business owner really means that you're removing yourself as that self-employed individual,
right,
and you start to manage the business as if it's a true business that generates profits on the back end.
Well, you start taking off some of the hats that you had to wear by necessity early
Exactly.
on, right?
And sometimes that's part of entrepreneurship. It's just, you just got to get in and get going.
Yeah.
And then you learn to slowly remove yourself.
Yeah.
But I would say entrepreneurship is kind of one of those journeys that I think most entrepreneurs, as they get into it, probably need to realize that you're going to have to try a lot harder and you're going to have to spend a lot more time than you initially thought
Absolutely.
to then make it worthwhile. But in the end, it's not about the money. Because when I think back over, the Jorden of Austin, when I bought my first practice there, I'm a very different business owner and entrepreneur now.
Right.
And it's been about that journey and the person that I've become, as opposed to starting into that entrepreneurship journey because of the potential money I could make. I look back and it's been all about the person that I've become.
Yeah.
But first realizing that it's going to be a lot harder and a lot longer, and a lot more time spent to get there.
Well, and I think that's important for entrepreneurs to know, right, is that some of those skills that get you into entrepreneurship are not going to be the skills that help you excel, right, over time. And so you need like the grit and the passion and the perseverance and the willing to take on that pain early on. But then as you progress, you need to find ways to remove pain, right? You need to put systems in place. You need to find ways to scale.
Yes.
And so it's always interesting to talk to entrepreneurs who have been through that progression. We talk to Corbin Church pretty regularly in the tech transfer office.
I listen to that.
And he probably came into entrepreneurship a little bit earlier than us. He talks about owning businesses in high school and things, but like he talks about that progression, and you can see it in how he deals with his new ventures, right? In how he sets things up to succeed without him needing to be there day by day. And that's what you're doing at this point in time. So tell us a little bit about the transition from, downtown Austin into rural Texas, the first practice that you bought, and why you decided to pivot into these rural areas.
Yeah. I alluded to it a little bit before, but we're small town kids. We grew up in a small community.
It's where we're comfortable for sure.
We're ranch boys. I mean, we definitely, that's kind of part of who we are, in our upbringing. So I was downtown Austin, COVID hit, and for some reason COVID, and I mean it made sense, but the state of Texas, the dental board in Texas, they shut down dentistry. Essentially all preventative, normal care that you provide in a dental office was shut down, and we could provide emergency care only. And so with that said, so many dentists, and I would say these baby boomer dentists who were approaching retirement age already, just the rules and regulations that the state board came down with, they all almost at once raised their hand in the marketplace and said, I'm done.
Right.
We're ready to, so many of them were just ready to sell their practice and be done. And I had built all these relationships with the brokers that were brokering these deals, for the last year in preparation to buy my first. And so I had several brokers reach out, and they knew my plans. They knew I wanted to potentially buy a second practice. And while I was focused on Austin, all the opportunities, and we're talking really awesome opportunities, were available in these small rural towns. And these other dental groups were not picking them up, and no one was really interested in them. So as I started to visit a couple of the practices, I realized that these practices actually were, they were these little hidden gems where their active patient base was large, and the old baby boomer doctors were getting tired. And they started to move away from providing preventative care, and they just were providing emergency care in general. If teeth broke, they would fix it. And while they had provided great care for decades, they were just ready to be done.
Right.
And they were ready to just get out. They were highly motivated, which meant they were either going to sell or finance the deal to me, or they were just going to take a lower offer just to get out.
Right. They were just at the end of their career. They're like, I've made my money. I'm just done with this practice, ready to move on.
Exactly. And so I found one that I really liked. It was situated right next to a retirement community. And we're talking in small town, rural East Texas. And so I bought that practice. The bank financed it, and leveraged my first practice, against that loan. And I was able to sign on that. And I had already hired an associate doctor at my first practice. So I was starting to transition out of the chair clinically, starting to manage the practice from I wasn't I wasn't the cook in the kitchen anymore. I wasn't the dentist providing the care.
Right.
I had already had that, position covered. And so as I purchased the second practice and I started doing some dentistry there, I fell in love with the small towns. Being a small town kid myself, I just felt like, man, this is just an incredible opportunity to improve the standard of care in these small towns. And then I started to develop my strategy, which now became Hometown Dental Partners. Yeah. And that strategy of Hometown Dental Partners is we focus on these small towns and we buy these old practices. They look like the 70s. They smell like the 70s. and we go in there and we, the first thing we do is we shut down the practice for a month and we do an aesthetic upgrade. Yeah. We have some, relationships with some contractors and we scrape down the popcorn ceiling, take down the wallpaper and, put in some nice flooring and we just improve the space. We help these patients feel like they're now, in the 21st century.
Make it feel like care. More like a modern dental
Exactly.
office.
We bring in scanning technology. We bring in just, better radiograph technology and just elevate the standard of care. Yeah. And that's how we got started, and that started in 2021 is when I bought my second practice. Okay. And since then, we've added, to that second practice, we've added 4 more locations, with a fifth on the way right now.
Fantastic. And you ended up selling the Austin practice, is that correct?
Okay. Yes. As our strategy really started to take form with Hometown Dental Partners, it just made sense to move away from the downtown strategy. Yeah. And we found a great buyer that took over my Austin practice, and that was my baby. I slept in that practice. That's where I started. But incredibly grateful that we found an owner that saw the vision that I had, put in place there and ended up ultimately selling that practice. Still going strong there. The associates that I had hired there are still there. Yeah. And so it just made me incredibly proud to find an owner that could continue the progress that we've made there. We tripled the revenue there at that first practice and was able to really capitalize on those, just on the improvement in the asset value there. Right. Yeah. And then it just really catapulted me into this multi-practice ownership now, where we're at 5 locations with Hometown Dental Partners with the 6th on the way.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think that is another just note for entrepreneurs listening is that where you start, you're going to pivot, right? Yes. Your plan is going to change, and sometimes you're going to have to give up on things that are really important to you. Like you said, you literally lived there for a period of time, right? That was your home. That was your baby. Yeah. And you needed to move on to other things. And I think that in entrepreneurship, that is a healthy way to view it, rather than clinging on and trying to force things to work because you have some sentimental hold on it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And when I looked at the market too, we had all these private equity backed dental groups that were in the rural area, not in the rural areas. They were in the dense urban areas. Right. That's where the money was coming in. But there were not dental groups that were growing in rural East Texas.
Yeah. So it was where the
opportunity was. And I just went with it. Yeah. And I could have probably analyzed myself out of taking those opportunities. Yeah. But ultimately I said, hey, I'm just going to say yes and I'm going to figure it out.
Well, you're going to err on the side of taking action, right? Yes. And then hoping and knowing that things will work out as they should.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. And it's been an incredible ride so far. As we stand right now, I have 1 more week of clinical dentistry and then I'm out of the chair, and hopefully I'm out of the chair forever.
Yeah. Well, and tell us a little bit about that transition, because that seems like a big change for you. Yeah. And one quote that I would attribute to you, maybe somebody else has said it right, but is a mindset shift from delegating tasks to delegating outcomes. And how has that shaped how you are approaching managing these different dental offices?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think every leader and every entrepreneur is going to go through this transition where you're going to hit certain pain points on your journey. And each pain point you're going to hit, you really have to ask yourself, okay, why am I feeling the pain that I'm feeling? Am I overwhelmed operationally? Am I overwhelmed wearing the hat of cook in the kitchen, of, dentist behind the handpiece drilling on teeth? Yeah. And you hit these pain points and you really have to analyze where you're spending your time, what needs to be offloaded, which one of these tasks is really providing the pain, analyze, replace yourself with some of those, those tasks that are really bombarding your time and taking over your time, and then become the next leader that allows your organization to grow. Right. And, as I evolved from Austin, and being that, transactional leader, delegating tasks. I was the one ultimately responsible for the outcomes. Right. I held myself responsible there. But when I moved away from Austin and bought practice number 2, and then when I, bought practice number 3, I had to slowly, and I was forced to become a transformational leader and hold my team members accountable to those outcomes.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't make that transition, then you become the bottleneck.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Like
you burn
you
out.
are the limit and the restriction to
Yes.
how big your company can grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you hit a pain point like that, and a bottleneck is a pain point, when you hit that pain point, many entrepreneurs will do one of three things. They will either sell. They'll sell a business.
Which isn't a terrible option.
No,
but,
not a bad
you know,
option at all. But you
yeah.
hit the pain point, and you're not going to live in pain forever.
Yeah, you can only take it for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. They will also start to sabotage the opportunity. And that's the second thing that they'll start to do is they hit this pain point and then they start to sabotage. They start coming up with all the other things that they could be doing.
Right.
You know, they start to spend more money on marketing, or they start to just spend time doing other things besides just embrace the pain and figure out how to get out of it.
Instead of fixing the problem, they just lean into it and come up with reasons why. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the third thing that I believe that they do is they settle. They just start to settle. They hit that pain point and they're like, well, I'm going to stop pushing for that growth and I'm going to settle back to where I would know I didn't have that pain.
Right. Yeah.
And
so
ultimately,
instead of pushing through the pain, they just back off of it so they're not experiencing it.
Exactly. And so when I hit that pain point, you know, and I had to become that transformational leader, I had to truly audit my time and learn to fill my time up with other activities that allowed me to become that next version, that next leader that my organization needed.
Yeah.
And that came down to, building an operating system for all my offices, putting in standard operating procedures, writing them all down, making an entire library of videos about, hey, this is how we do this and this is how we do that. And when this problem or fire comes up, here's the standard operating procedure to solve it.
Yeah.
Because I can't continue to answer those questions every single time the same recurring fire happens in the organization.
Right.
And it really forced me to then also hold my office managers and hold my dentists that I have hired to a standard and hold them to their own KPIs. They're responsible for those outcomes, and I'm there as their mentor to help them grow. And of course, incentives have to align there.
Of course,
Like I can't just say, hey, this is what you're going to do, and there's no additional incentives. My team members need to know. And usually when we say incentives, it's usually monetary.
Yeah.
It comes down to, hey, if I make more and if the office does more, you get to make more as well. But incentives have to align as you move from becoming this transactional leader to this transformational leader, and having true operators and key team members that will then run that business for you.
Well, and finding the way to optimize your team in accordance with their skills.
Yes.
Because one problem that we see sometimes with tech transfer startups is that we'll have a technical founder of a company who maybe is like the dentist in this situation, right?
Yeah.
And they are fantastic at the technical side of the product. And they grow to a point where the problems are no longer technical, right? The problems aren't in the dentistry, it's in the business and in scaling the business. And we've seen lots of different ways to approach it, right? Like what you're talking about, where that leader, that technical founder will need to transition themselves into this transformational leader. And we've also seen people who bring in somebody who is a transformational leader, right? Who's already done this before, who can come in and say, great, you now have the technical side, right? And now I'll take care of the rest. And we've seen those companies really expand and grow. And what do you feel like gave you the confidence to feel like, hey, I can take on this transformational role myself versus, hey, maybe we need to bring in like an experienced CEO? Was that given thought, or does it just feel natural to you to make that transition yourself?
I think for me, it feels natural because of the passion behind it. But I will say that I would be lying if I didn't feel inadequate. If I didn't feel a little bit of the imposter syndrome that comes in, as I'm looking to scale my organization and we've, refinanced our debt, with a lending institution that helps groups grow now,
right.
And they're betting on me. They're betting on me as that leader and that visionary to help grow my organization.
You're the linchpin in the whole organization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as I've approached this time, and it's very unique and kind of serendipitous that we're talking now, because I'm truly about to step out of the chair and stop, being that active clinical dentist that's providing care to patients and become that leader that my organization needs. Yeah. And I'd be lying if I wasn't feeling inadequate or feeling those feelings of imposter syndrome.
Right.
But I also tell myself that's the cost. These feelings of growing an organization and these feelings of doubt that can creep in, that's just the cost. It's the cost of doing something worthwhile.
Well, and it's nothing new, right? Every entrepreneur has done that.
Yes.
And almost every entrepreneur that I know of has like a solid technical background in something that they have transitioned away from to take advantage of the opportunities that they've created for themselves. So it's nothing new, but it probably feels different when you're the one going through it versus just talking about somebody else going through that.
For sure. And so, I take that feeling I'm like, okay, hey, I feel it, but feelings are fickle. We can't ever rely on our feelings, but I can rely on my goals. I can rely on my standards that I set for myself on a daily basis. And I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah.
And I tell myself, as long as I don't stop, as long as I don't quit, like we're going to continue to be profitable. We're going to be able to continue to grow. And if I'm committed to my own growth, then I believe my organization will grow. Yeah. But I think another side to that coin, though, is also making sure you're networking with people that have been there and done that.
Yes.
Because that is just something that, like, while I haven't been there and done that, there's been a lot of big dental groups that have grown.
Yeah, you're not the first one to go through this.
No. And thinking that I'm special or that I'm the only one that's done this is like, it's not helpful.
Yeah, letting go of your own view of your own specialness is one of the hardest things ever.
Yes.
But the sooner you do it, the faster you're going to succeed, in my opinion.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And so there's been a lot of mentors that I've networked with that are helping me make better decisions and manage my cash differently and set up these relationships with banks so that I can continue to grow. But they've been there. They've done that. They've gone from one location to the, 5 locations that I'm at now to the 30 to the 75 locations, and they've had different learning, experiences along the way.
And it's great that they can give you insights into, hey, your next problem, which you're not experiencing yet, but is going to be X. And so you need to start doing some of these things now. So when you get there, it's not quite as painful as when I went through it myself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And, and a lot of things that I'm hearing now is that, like, I'm now on this journey to build the team, build the machine that grows the machine,
right?
And so now I'm really needing to centralize my leadership and make sure my leadership is positioned in a way where I can then step out of the operational role of checking in with my office managers and my doctors and step into the role of visionary and looking to, push the organization forward, ensuring that culture and vision stay strong. Yeah. But, all of that comes with time, and it comes with, making sure there's cash available and making sure that you're doing it responsibly and you're being a strong steward, of that responsibility of managing money and managing the business. But it's been one of incredible growth, and I just feel fortunate to have the opportunity to continue to grow.
Yeah, fantastic. And so thinking with mentorship in mind, what advice would you give your younger self, right? So if you were talking to Jordan just graduating, right, thinking about taking this journey, what would you tell him at that point?
Oh, that's a great question. There's this, I've talked a little bit about this, but your life as it stands right now, it is a composite of all of the days leading up to this moment right now. And, the BYU, not the football coach, the BYU basketball coach talks about stacking days. We're stacking days. And I would say that your life, the ultimate life that you want to live, maybe that 10.0 version of yourself that you want to become, you only get to live that life, and you only get to become that person that you feel like you can become if you continue to stack days. Yep. And we're talking day after day of putting out fires, day after day of feeling inadequate, but leaning into that inadequacy and becoming the next leader, the next version of leadership that you need to become. But then as you continue to approach those endeavors with a sincere desire to be a good leader, to be a kind and loving leader that leads your people, with integrity. But then as you do that day in and day out, you'll ultimately get to live that life. But it's day in and day out. You don't miss a day. Your days truly become your weeks. Your weeks become your months. And as you look back over, your life, the moment that you're standing right now truly is a composite of all the days that you've lived up until this moment.
Exactly.
And
I think if where you're standing right now isn't where you want to be, right, or isn't where you want to be headed, you have to take that first step today, right? There's no reason to delay it, because you have to start stacking days right now. Right
now, you got to start stacking days. Yeah. And it's not impressive. I've met with other dental students as they say, hey, I want to do exactly what you're doing, or just entrepreneurs in general. I work with several entrepreneurs in the city, in the community where I live. And they ask me, hey, I'd love to, scale my organization. I'd love to be doing what you're doing. And, and I remind them, hey, my journey's been 6 years up into this point, and I'm trying to build something that's real. And I'm not looking for a shortcut. It's going to take time to build something that's real. Yeah. But that time, it only becomes something worthwhile as you continue to stack your days.
Yes.
And so, as you feel discouraged, maybe have a bad moment, but don't let that bad moment turn into a bad day.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't, like, we all have our bad moments where, you know, but to not let those bad moments turn into a bad day and continue to do your best to stack day after day.
Yeah. And remind yourself that overnight success that you saw online was 10 years in the making.
Exactly.
Right? That it didn't really happen overnight, right? That it was that stacking days that, you know, before you even were paying attention to them, they were doing these things and setting themselves up for that success.
Yeah. And when I say stacking days, you know, it was hours, days on end here in this, you know, here in this building that we're on, you know, here on campus, studying to take the dental admissions test. Yeah. It was the hours I spent studying for boards in dental school. It was hours I spent, you know, studying dental business. And now it's, you know, I live, eat, sleep, you know, everything in my life surrounds growing my organization and ensuring that I'm setting ourselves up for success in the future. Yeah. And it is, I mean, it has been a decade plus of stacking these days to the point where I'm at. And I'm hopeful to continue to, you know, morph into the next better version of myself, the next better version of Hometown Dental Partners, and where I envision the organization going.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. And directionality is incredibly important there, right? Because if 10 years ago you weren't pointed in the direction that you wanted to be, right, you'd be 10 years headed in the wrong direction.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I always remind myself to take a second and reflect and make sure that the things I'm doing today are truly the things that are going to push me towards my long-term goals. Because if not, again, I'm either getting further away, right, or heading towards something that I don't understand, which is generally what we don't want to be doing.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, you know, I think there's so many other pieces of advice that I may, you know, strive to give myself, but just kind of, it'd be just a reminder that you truly are becoming that person right now. Yeah. So make sure that it's in the right direction and make sure you continue to stack those days, because ultimately there's no overnight success. Yeah. It's a composite of all the days you've lived.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh,
I think
of course.
we're just about out of time. Did you have any other parting thoughts or anything that you felt like the audience should need to hear? Again, we talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, to tech founders. You know, obviously we're partial to tech transfer.
Absolutely.
But any kind of entrepreneurship and that mindset is just so important, which is part of the reason I wanted to bring you in today.
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, I think just entrepreneurship in general, I think is just one of those things where I believe the mindset of understanding that you're going to have to work harder. And you're going to have to spend more time than you ever thought possible to build something that's real, that provides real value in the marketplace. Yeah. But understanding that it's not ultimately about the money that you get to make at the end, but it's about the person you're becoming as you go down that journey. Yeah. I mean, business and entrepreneurship for me has been as much, if not more, of a spiritual game than it ever has been a game about earning money. So I guess those will be my parting thoughts of just becoming that next better version of yourself, and entrepreneurship's been that for me.
And what I heard there was it'll take twice as long, be twice as difficult, be twice as painful, and yet in the end it will still be worth it.
Oh, it's still, I mean, at least for me, it's been absolutely worth it. And I can only speak for me and my experience. Of course. But yes, I mean, make sure the proper expectations are just that. It's going to take twice as long, you know, and maybe not, but for me, it's been that. Yeah. But it's been incredibly worth it so far, and we're gonna keep stacking days.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for being here with us. We really appreciate it.
Of course, it's fun to be here.